Land is the basis of all independence.
Hello YouTube, this is Dr. V's Revolution Will Not Be Pesticides, and today I'm going to do a video on the new movie that is coming out called Judas and the Black Messiah. This is actually starring Lakeith Stanfield and Daniel Kaluuya.
Deputy Chairman Fred Hampton of the Illinois Black Panther Party.
Repeat after me. I am a revolutionary. I am a revolutionary. I am a revolutionary.
These two stars actually were also in the movie Get Out with one another, and now they're actually starring in this film. Lakeith Stanfield is playing the FBI informant who infiltrated the Black Panther Party by the name of William O'Neill, and then Daniel Kaluuya is playing Fred Hampton Sr. Okay, so this is going to be an interesting film. So first, to get started, I don't really go to the movies that much at all because I'm not really interested in very many movies. But every now and then there's a movie that will come around, a historical movie that will come around that's right up my alley in terms of my interest in history, and I'll go and see those movies. Not all of them, but some of them I won't even see, but in theaters. But a movie like this one, I think is very compelling, and I'm actually going to go see this one because I was already interested in Fred Hampton in the first place. So, what is this movie about? Well, the name itself kind of gives it away. Judas and the Black Messiah. Who was Judas? Judas was a traitorous Benedict Arnold type of figure. And this is what this movie is about. It's telling a story about the Black Panther Party and how they're infiltrated by the FBI, right? Now this is also something that was not only done with the Black Panther Party for self-defense, but it was also the infiltration by the FBI in this program known as COINTELPRO, which stands for Counterintelligence Program, headed by J. Edgar Hoover, was something that was done to a lot of organizations throughout the 1950s and 60s and into the early 70s. They infiltrated the Black Panther Party, they infiltrated Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, they infiltrated the SCLC, Southern Christian Leadership Conference by Martin Luther King Jr., they infiltrated the Nation of Islam, and they infiltrated all kinds of organizations at the time. And the way they would go about it is they would use informants, black informants, typically young kids or young adults that would commit these petty crimes and sometimes serious crimes, and they would get them to, when they would bring up all these charges on these individuals, as was the case with William O'Neill, the guy who infiltrated the Black Panther Party to get at Fred Hampton. He was facing felony charges that would put him in prison. So as a 19 or 20-year-old young adult, when you're facing these kinds of charges and then the FBI comes and sweeps down and then they say, hey, well, you can either serve this 20-year prison sentence or you can work for us, the majority of us would offer to work for the FBI. That's just the way it is. And that's essentially what this kid did. William O'Neill, he worked for the FBI. He infiltrated the organization, and usually you would infiltrate it in a very subtle way. You wouldn't just go and say, hey, can I join your organization? Many times these people would just hang around the vicinity where the Black Panther Party was operating, get themselves seen, get themselves recognized, get themselves acknowledged, and to the point where those Black Panther individuals would actually go and approach them, the informant, and rather than the informant going to approach the Black Panther Party, because there would be skepticism there if the informant goes and approaches the party itself. So, just to give a little background information on who Fred Hampton is and what this whole thing is about. Fred Hampton was born in Summit, Illinois, a suburb of Chicago, and then he eventually moved to Maywood, Illinois, another suburb of Chicago. His parents were actually from Louisiana. A lot of people that were in Chicago in these days, he was born in 1948, a lot of people that were in Chicago and some of these northern cities in these days had family that came from the Deep South. and they came up to the north during the Great Migration. Once jobs in industry and factories and things like that were more available in the north than they were in the south, so people went up to the north to make a living. Fred Hampton was a product of the same Great Migration. By the time Fred Hampton got to be in high school, he showed great talent. He was an athlete. He was a football player. He was a baseball player. He was a big guy, and he was a very intelligent guy. He joined the NAACP, and he was able to organize like no other person can organize. He was a great orator. He had the ability to speak very, very well, unlike I just did right there. And he was a guy that was very charismatic, and he had the ability to pull numbers, get people to join the NAACP like nobody else. So at the time, he was very interested in pre-law, because he was about to go to college, and he decided he wanted to major in pre-law because he was very interested in black people at the time in the 1960s, knowing their rights, knowing all these kinds of things. But as time went on, right around 1966, 1967, Fred Hampton, he started to recognize certain things and started to come into, like, in terms of police brutality and these kinds of things going on in Chicago. But in I believe it was 1967, is when Fred Hampton actually officially joined the Black Panther Party. And this would have made him about 19 years old at the time. Now, when he joined the Black Panther Party, at the time the Black Panther Party was pretty new to Chicago. Black Panther Party started off in Oakland, and it's called the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense. The Black Panther Party was a party in which, and a lot of times these days we confuse it for the modern day Black Panther Party that we hear about in the media, and then sometimes there's this negative stigma attached to the party itself. But the Black Panther Party was essentially, it was an organization of people who were trying to police their own neighborhoods, protect their own neighborhoods, because in a lot of these neighborhoods, like in Oakland, California, at the time where the party started out with Bobby Seale and Huey P. Newton, their neighborhoods were being occupied. They felt like, according to their perspective, they felt like black neighborhoods were being occupied by police in the same way that Vietnam was occupied by the French and by the United States around the same time. And so they felt like in order to have any type of like justice or freedom or liberty within their own neighborhoods, they had to police the police.
So, Huey, so what's your telephone number?
Well, I confirm with you my address. That's all I'm required by California law to do. We ain't broken no law.
Then what are you doing with that gun?
Well, what are you doing with yours?
Let me see that rifle, son.
No, this is my private property. According to California law, we got a constitutional right to bear arms.
What?
Okay, move along. Go on about your business.
Wait, brothers and sisters, no. You ain't got to go nowhere. This is your business. Stay right here. The law says, as long as you stand a reasonable distance, that's 8 to 10 feet to be exact, you've got a right to observe the police carrying out their duties. From what I can see, you're standing 22 feet away from this man. So, brothers, ain't no law being broken.
That's right. You stay right where you are. You ain't got to go nowhere.
Hold their feet to the fire, which is a principle of our founding fathers of the United States as well. You always got to hold politicians' feet to the fire, as well as holding the authoritative figures' feet to the fire to make sure they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. So they would go around and they knew the law, they learned the law, and they knew they had the Second Amendment right to bear arms. And whenever police officers would go and harass somebody in a certain neighborhood or in a certain area, they would come out. The Black Panthers would be riding in these Buicks, maybe 5 or 6 deep, all with shotguns in their hands. And then they would hop out the car, and then they would start citing certain laws, city laws, constitutional law, and then they would have their guns on them just in case the officers wanted to get rough. And so this became a serious threat for a lot of people. And it got so bad to the point where, at the time, Governor Ronald Reagan, he ended up ratifying the Mulford Act, which made open carry illegal in the state of California. So the Mulford Act restricted the Black Panther Party's Second Amendment rights. Not only their Second Amendment rights, but everybody in California's Second Amendment rights were restricted at that point. So back to Fred Hampton. And then Fred Hampton joined the Black Panther Party in Chicago. At the time, that party was a pretty nascent, pretty new party in Chicago. It was introduced and led by Bob Brown, who was a member of SNCC, a Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, in 1967. And by 1968, Fred Hampton had joined and had moved up in the rankings, showing his ability to not only organize people and get a lot of people to join, but also just a great speaker, a very charismatic individual that he was able to galvanize the masses like no other.
Bobby Seale is going through all types of physical and mental torture. But that's all right, because we said even before this happened, and we're going to say it after this, and after I'm locked up, and after everybody's locked up, that you can jail revolutionaries, but you can't jail a revolution.
So when Fred Hampton ended up joining the movement, he did things in a way where he got people to work together and come together like no other. He was able to put forth this non-aggression pact for the gangs throughout Chicago. He was even in the process of getting about 100,000 gang members throughout Chicago and the areas around there to join the Black Panther Party. They established some of their initiatives in the Chicago branch of the Black Panther Party was to provide legal advice for individuals. They had obviously to police the police, as they'd been doing in California. They had a breakfast club. They had their own little. They fed the homeless. They wanted to work on providing health clinics for people, and so. But one of their main things, and he was also an educator. He tutored people. He taught people. At 6 o'clock in the morning, he would wake up early and go and teach kids in the morning. In addition to the breakfast clubs, the breakfast programs where they gave free breakfast to kids. So they believed, the Black Panther Party in Chicago believed in self-determination, right? They believed in self-empowerment. They believed that the government is not going to go and do things for people, so you got to go do things yourself. And even though Fred Hampton was a self-proclaimed revolutionary socialist, he was a socialist in a de facto sense of the term, not in a de jure sense. I don't think that Fred Hampton believed that the government should take from people who are not willing to give just to be able to give to other people. He believed in that the people, the masses, should take the initiative and start creating alliances amongst themselves and create a more, I guess, equal society in where people actually are voluntarily making pacts, being cooperative with others in that sense. But this wasn't good for the powers that be. Let me tell you something about Fred Hampton. Fred Hampton, not only did he have the ability to get the gang members to go into a non-aggression pact and join the Black Panther Party, but he also got two other major organizations in Chicago at the time to join in what he called the Rainbow Coalition. All right, one group was called the Young Lords, which consisted of Latino individuals. The other group was known as the Young Patriots Organization. The Young Patriots Organization consisted of mostly, all white, lower class individuals, mostly from Appalachia, places like parts of Kentucky, West Virginia, Western Virginia, those places there, up in the mountains, Appalachian Mountains. The poor, downtrodden whites who had been displaced and ended up moving because of the poor economy in those areas, moving into Chicago, and a part of Chicago that they called Hillbilly Harlem. They brought with them their Confederate flags. They brought with them their Southern pride. And then the Young Patriots Organization, sometimes referred to as the Neo-Confederates, were on the surface, a seemingly white, racist organization, brandishing the Confederate flag and all those kinds of things. But Fred Hampton had the ability to see through all that stuff. And he said, despite the fact that they might say the N-word, and despite the fact that they might have their gripes with the other races, he said, look, we are all in this together, and we all have the same common enemy. And the common enemy is the government. The common enemy was the government that was shipping our jobs overseas. This was something that was starting to happen in an increasing rate in the late 60s into the 70s, shipping our jobs overseas to make a completely jobless society where now people who are fleeing into Chicago from other parts of the place looking for job opportunities, now the job opportunities even in Chicago are being sent over abroad. So now it's like they all have a common situation, and the struggle wasn't a race-based struggle. The struggle was more of a class struggle. So the Young Patriots Organization, the Young Lords, and the Black Panther Party came together and formed what they called the Rainbow Coalition. The Black Panther Party said, look, you can join our organization as long as you denounce your racist views. If you could denounce your racist views, we'll accept you. But the Black Panther Party was okay with them wearing the Confederate flag and those things, because the Black Panther Party realized, and Fred Hampton realized, you have to be able to see things from another people's perspective. And the way the Young Patriots Organization saw the Confederate flag, they saw it as a flag of heritage, and they also saw it as a flag of rebellion, sticking it to the man. This was their identity juxtaposed with the American flag, right? This is the way they saw it. And sometimes whenever you're trying to organize and whenever you're trying to come together, sometimes you have to find your commonalities with people. And the commonalities that they had with one another outweighed those differences. And sometimes media and society likes to create divisions amongst people, even though they actually have more in common than one would think. In fact, even if you go all the way back to the founding, to the early years of this country, this is the same tactic that was used by the elite in those days. You divide people based on race, right? So originally, if you look at Jamestown, Virginia, 1607. In 1612, they introduced the tobacco plant into Jamestown, which became a cash crop. Right after 1612, they started to bring in Irish servants, basically slaves. They would sometimes kidnap the Irishmen out of Ireland, bring them to Jamestown. They'd kidnap even English poor people, vagabonds. They took orphans, they took debtors, they took prisoners, and they brought them all into Virginia. So some of the whites from England had voluntarily signed up to go to Virginia because the economic situation was so bad in England. But they were promised that they worked for 7 years as a bondsman, as 7 years of service for a particular landowner there. Then they would eventually get their freedom and then get a piece of land after they get this freedom. But in many cases, these whites, these Irishmen, these Englishmen that were sent to Virginia to work for this certain amount of time, being promised their freedom in the end, sometimes would never get to see their freedom because they'd be worked to death. There's a book called... Then in the year 1619, when they started to import Africans from Latin America into Virginia, these Africans actually had a very similar status as the Europeans, the Irishmen and the Englishmen, the poor Englishmen that were working on the tobacco plantations as well. So the thing is this, and one of the reasons why they had this similar status is because the English didn't believe in enslaving Christians. And all the slaves, or all the servants that they were actually getting from Latin America were baptized Christians, because the Spanish and the Portuguese believed that whenever you were bringing someone into slavery, one of the first things that you did was is you baptized them. And so they would baptize these people as soon as they got on the slave ship, and then they would be working on these plantations. So when the people of Virginia started importing slaves from Latin America, they were baptized Christians. And the Englishmen didn't have laws in the books to even deal with slavery. But one thing that they did believe was that you should not enslave a Christian. And whereas Spanish, Latin America, French America, they had slave laws, they had slave codes in their books that stem back from the Roman Empire, like Las Siete Partidas, or you had Code Noir with the French. And so this is really interesting to point out. But then as time went on in Virginia, you started to see the blacks and the whites working together to either run away or overthrow the system in its entirety. So they started to have to make a distinction, a divide and conquer tactic that's as old as time. Whenever a group of people start to come together to overthrow a very minority, small elite, this is when you have to find a way to divide these people. And then once you divide them, then they no longer have the numbers on their side. And then this is what essentially started to happen in Virginia. One of the first distinctive laws that was passed was the Militia Act of 1639-1640 in Virginia, which simply stated that whites were required to be armed, and whites were required to have to take up arms just in case they had to serve in the militia. Blacks were not required. There was also the John Punch case, where 3 servants ran away, 2 of them white, 1 of them black. The black one, his name was John Punch. When they were all captured and taken back into servitude, the 2 white servants got a couple years extended period of servitude, and where John Punch, the black individual, had to serve life. In 1662, you had the Partus Sequitur Ventrum law. The Partus Sequitur Ventrum law basically stated it reversed English common law, and it was basically saying that which comes from the womb is to be enslaved. So English common law had it before that children inherit the status of the father, right? And so if these white men are raping or forcing themselves on black women, and then they're having brown children, these brown children, before the Partus Sequitur Ventrum law, would inherit the status and the wealth and the land of the white father. So you would have this society where you have a bunch of free brown individuals running around who are very wealthy, right? So they reversed this, and this was a practice that was being done in Latin America and some of the French colonies, where the children would inherit the status of the father. That's why you had large, free people of color in places like Brazil or places like Haiti and things like that. So they wanted to reverse this, and so that's when they came up with Partus Sequitur Ventrum. So all the women who are being violated, all the black women are being violated by white men on these plantations, are now producing children who are not free, inheriting the wealth of the white wealthy landowner, but they are now enslaved because they now inherit the status of the mother. And there's a number of laws throughout time that were similar to these. You had the taxable law of 1643. You had the 1680 codes that came about after the Nathaniel Bacon Rebellion, and then you had the official 1705 Virginia Slave Codes, where it pretty much solidifies that blacks can no longer own white labor. Because one of the things that's important to note was that because the blacks had a similar status to the whites in the early years of Virginia, you did still have some blacks or some whites that would get their freedom after 7 years of servitude, and you still had blacks that got their freedom after 7 years of servitude. So you had free black populations and free white populations kind of cohabitating, living together, getting married together, and things like that for a time period. And you even had some blacks who were landowners who owned white servants coming out of Ireland or coming out of England. This was a thing at the time. But then by the year 1705, they made it official that no black person is allowed to own white people or own any white labor. And then they started to make a clear distinction between the status of blacks and the status of whites. The whites were to serve as a buffer, even though they might not have been very wealthy and they might not have been very, very well off, but they were to serve as a buffer between the very wealthy elite and the enslaved Africans. More and more laws were getting into the books that made the Africans chattel slaves, movable property, the status of anything less than human. The late 1600s, early 1700s, 1705 Virginia slave codes, and certain codes that would be adopted by other colonies and states, you would see the complete dehumanization of the people in that respect. And then you would see the racial hierarchy forming, and it was nothing but a divide and conquer tactic. All right, because many of these poor whites still didn't have any types of real privileges. There was just privileges in name. It was privileges in idea, but it wasn't really true privileges in custom, because a lot of them ended up being poor, continued to be poor and downtrodden and not well taken care of. So this is something to take into consideration as well. This is the same thing that you see with the divide and conquer tactic that you saw in early Virginia in those days. It's the same type of tactic that you see in the 1960s with Fred Hampton's Rainbow Coalition.
What makes them mad about it? What makes them mad about it is that they had black people and white poor people and red poor people and Puerto Rican poor people and Latin American Puerto Rican people of poor people of all descents. They had them caught up in movements based on racism when the Black Panther Party stood up and said that we don't care what anybody says. We don't think you fight fire with fire best. We think you fight fire with water best. We're going to fight racism, not with racism, but we're going to fight with solidarity. We said we're not going to fight capitalism with black capitalism, but we're going to fight it with socialism. We stood up and said we're not going to fight reactionary pigs and reactionary state's attorneys like this and reactionary state's attorneys like Hanrahan with any other reactions on our part. We're going to fight their reactions where all of us people are getting together and have an international proletarian revolution.
Right on. Right on.
And that's saying all power to the people.
Right on.
That's saying that no matter what color you are, there's only two classes. And that's saying there's a class over here and there's a class over there. And the reason that this class over here has never did anything to get this class off its back because this is lower, this is upper, this is the oppressed, this is the oppressor, this is the exploited, this is the exploiter. And these people in this class have divided themselves. They say, I'm black and I hate white people. I'm white and I hate black people. I'm Latin American and I hate hillbillies. I'm hillbilly and I hate Indians. So we fight amongst each other. And you've heard the testimony of pigs here. You got pigs of all colors, you know that. You got pigs that are white, you got pigs that are black, you even got pigs that are black and white.
The gangs, the Black Panthers, the Young Patriots Organization, and the Young Lords were all coming together because they realized they had a common enemy at the time. They realized they had to come together and organize themselves in this way. The FBI, under COINTELPRO, came in there to infiltrate these organizations and destroy these organizations. And the thing is, the tactic that the FBI used was a division tactic. They actually started producing literature they said came from the Black Panthers, and then they disseminated it amongst the white members of the Rainbow Coalition, showing that the Black Panthers were racist against the whites. And they were trying to get this to deter the whites from joining with the blacks in the revolutionary quest throughout the Midwest at this time. All right. The COINTELPRO was a very shady organization. It's a very shady branch of the FBI. I mean, the FBI itself, under J. Edgar Hoover, and even probably still today, is a very shady, deep state type organization. In fact, Hoover, under the COINTELPRO, was quoted as saying, the organization is to expose, disrupt, misdirect, or otherwise neutralize the activities of black nationalists, hate-type organizations and groupings, their leadership, spokesmen, membership, and supporters. J. Edgar Hoover was also quoted as saying that the purpose was to prevent the rise of a messiah who could unify and electrify the militant black nationalist movement. Malcolm X might have been such a messiah. He is the martyr of the movement today. Martin Luther King, Stokely Carmichael, Elijah Muhammad all aspired to this position. Elijah Muhammad is less of a threat because of his age. King could be a very real contender for this position should he abandon his supposed obedience to white liberal doctrines and embrace black nationalism. Carmichael has the necessary charisma to be a real threat in this way. This is J. Edgar Hoover's policy, and the goal, as I stated before, it's to neutralize the movement, to kill it by any means necessary. This is what the government was trying to do. They could not have these people, poor, lower class people out of Chicago, out of the Midwest area, coming together, forgetting their racial differences, forgetting their religious differences, forgetting all these differences and coming together to truly fight the power. Fred Hampton used to say,
we say all power to all people. We say white power to white people. Brown power to brown people. Yellow power to yellow people. Black power to black people. X power to those that we left out. We say Panther power to the Vanguard Party.
Power to the people. This is what Fred Hampton used to say. This is what the government did not like. And subsequently, he was killed. Fred Hampton went out of town, went into California in the month of November of 1969. And while he was there, there was a shootout between Black Panthers and police officers in Chicago. This resulted in the death of 2 police officers and 1 Black Panther member. By the time Fred Hampton had gone back to Chicago, the district attorney's office, and the police department, and the FBI all scheduled a raid on Fred Hampton's home. This is where William O'Neill comes in. William O'Neill was the man who was the informant. And what he ended up doing was he was supposed to give information about the layout of the home where Fred Hampton was, and he was to drug a drink that Fred Hampton was drinking. So in the middle of the night, on December 3rd or 4th, I think it was, they raid Fred Hampton's home. The Chicago Police Department, FBI agents had gone in there. They claimed that the Black Panthers were shooting at them, but in reality, they had shot, the Chicago Police Department had shot 99 shots at the Black Panthers who were sleeping, and Fred Hampton, who was actually knocked out cold, couldn't even get up, and they shot 99 shots in the direction of his bedroom. All right. Fred Hampton's pregnant girlfriend was in the bedroom at the same time. She did not die as a result, nor did the baby. But Fred Hampton initially, when they found out that Fred Hampton did not die from these shots, he was severely wounded. This is when a police officer shot him at blank range 2 times in the head, outright killed him. So you can see how wrong this was. The government, the police department, the county, they all played a major role in the death of Fred Hampton. It was a cold-blooded assassination of this individual. And what ended up happening as a result, I think it was about 13 years later, they ended up settling on a lawsuit. The family of Fred Hampton was awarded $1.8 million, and the Chicago Police Department, the District Attorney's Office, and the FBI were all equally liable to split the payment of $1.8 million to the families in a settlement. The thing to note about this whole thing is that to show that there was an agenda behind all this, and it wasn't based on truth or anything like that, that the FBI special agent in Chicago was supposed to do a review and supposed to, tap the phone and supposed to listen in and do all the violations of the Constitution and the Fourth Amendment, supposed to engage in all these activities against the Black Panther Party. But what he ended up discovering, what he ended up revealing about the Black Panther Party was that they were more engaged in just simply feeding people during the breakfast programs than they were with anything else. So when he reported back to J. Edgar Hoover his findings after doing the research in the field in Chicago, J. Edgar Hoover said, "Your career is dependent upon you finding out information that this is a violent, racist organization that's looking to overthrow the government." And so this is when this special agent in Chicago went back and did some deeper investigations and then came back with a different story. Not because there was really anything to find, but he had to fabricate something just to spread this narrative at a time when the CIA was controlling our media. Because that was a real thing. It's called Operation Mockingbird. Go look it up. To make us think and believe all these negative things about the Black Panther Party for self-defense. The government assassinated individuals at this time who tried to stand up for what was right. And they created divisions amongst races to make sure they didn't come together and fight for what was right. This is the perfect example of that kind of thing. So I think we can learn a lot from this film that's coming out. I can't wait to see how they portray Fred Hampton. I can't wait to see how they portray the movement. I'm always a little skeptical about movies that come out mainstream and in Hollywood, because sometimes they do the reality of the situation a disservice, and they don't really show the full scope of the story. So we'll see how it looks. We'll see if there's an agenda or anything behind it. I'm not sure. But yeah, that was it. That's Fred Hampton, the Black Panther Party. Remember, guys, the revolution will not be pesticides. Peace.
Land is the basis of all independence.